The shocking WWII, Origins of 5 Everyday Objects, the hidden side of everyday objects. The ammo box was leaking. Rain had soaked the field for days, and water crept into everything, rifles, boots, and now the last box of rounds they had left. Under fire, a soldier ripped a strip of some strange, sticky green tape and pressed it across the seam. Somehow, it sealed perfectly, strong enough to hold against the downpour and the dirt. Nobody thought twice about it then. But that improvised fix, born from desperation, was one of countless small creations that would quietly survive the war longer than most of the soldiers who used them. World War II isn't remembered as an age of comfort, but it might be history's greatest factory of convenience. The kitchen drawer with duct tape, the microwave humming on the counter, the rugged SUV parked outside, each owes its existence to a war that demanded everything faster, lighter, and more efficient. In a time when human survival depended on ingenuity, necessity didn't just mother invention, it mass-produced it. Behind the front lines, in laboratories, factories, and sometimes kitchen sinks, people scrambled to solve problems no one had imagined before. How do you feed millions of troops? How do you keep ammunition dry in a thunderstorm? How do you save a life when blood spoils halfway across the ocean? None of these questions had easy answers. Yet in answering them, World War II accidentally built the blueprints of the modern world. The thing is, we rarely connect the dots. We grab a roll of duct tape to fix a broken tail light, never realizing that it once patched bullet holes and gas lines. We reheat leftovers in seconds, unaware that the same microwave technology once tracked Nazi bombers. We see a Jeep as a weekend adventure toy, but not as a wartime icon crafted in a 49-day sprint to outpace death itself. We step into hospitals and trust the blood that flows through sterile tubes, not knowing it started as a portable miracle for wounded soldiers in muddy field tents. And that small white pill, penicillin, wasn't just a medical breakthrough. It was a military resource guarded as closely as any weapon. This story is about that invisible thread, how a global catastrophe turned design into survival and survival into everyday life. But there's something darker hidden under that progress. Many of these marvels were built on rushed experiments, overlooked inventors, and forgotten sacrifices. Innovation didn't happen neatly. It happened because there was no other choice. Ethical lines blurred, credit vanished, and governments turned science into strategy. Still, amid the fear and chaos, ordinary people made extraordinary things. A mother writing to the army about waterproof ammo boxes sparked one of history's most useful inventions. Scientists tracking radar beams in wartime labs stumbled onto a discovery that would change how we eat. Thousands of anonymous workers in factories, labs, and hospitals unknowingly formed the bridge between wartime desperation and modern convenience. So how much of our daily world owes its existence to humanity's darkest hour? This documentary will unfold as 5 mini-stories, each beginning in chaos and ending in astonishment. Ordinary people, forced by crisis, created inventions that still surround us. As you'll see, every solution hides an ethical dilemma or unintended consequence that shapes how we live today. Our first story begins not in a lab or a factory, but in a soldier's hands, holding a strip of tape, sticky and green, that would eventually hold together a world at peace. Duct tape, the soldier's secret fix. It all began with a mother and a letter. In early 1943, in Illinois, a factory worker named Vesta Stoudt was sealing ammunition boxes for the U.S. Navy. Her sons were serving overseas, and every day she helped pack the cartridges they might need to survive. She noticed something about the design that bothered her. The cardboard boxes were wax-coated for waterproofing, but the top tabs were sealed with paper tape. Under heavy fire or in a storm, the flimsy tape got wet, the boxes took on water, and soldiers lost precious seconds peeling at soggy tabs trying to get ammunition out. In war, a few seconds could mean the difference between living and not. Stoudt had an idea, a fabric-backed tape that could seal the boxes watertight but still rip open quickly by hand. She took her plan to supervisors at her plant. They dismissed her suggestion. It wasn't her job to redesign army packaging. But Vesta wasn't the kind of person who left an idea to die quietly. She wrote straight to the top. Her handwritten letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt began respectfully but didn't hide her frustration. "We can't afford the loss of time or of ammunition due to the poor sealing," she explained. She attached sketches, proposed materials, and even predicted how soldiers would peel it off in one movement. She just wanted the government to try it. Weeks later, Roosevelt passed her letter down the chain to the War Production Board. Johnson & Johnson, already producing military medical supplies, got the contract to prototype it. A small team of engineers took Stout's concept and ran with it, layering rubber-based adhesive onto a woven cotton fabric known as duck cloth. The result was a flexible, waterproof tape that could be torn by hand, yet was strong enough to hold outside in the rain. Soldiers received shipments labeled as duct tape, a name derived from both the fabric and the waterproof quality. No one knew it was about to become one of the quiet heroes of the war. At the outset, its purpose was simple: keeping ammunition dry. Field reports from the Pacific showed that crates sealed with the new tape stayed dry even after being dumped from landing craft into the surf. Logistics officers loved it because it cut failure rates dramatically, but soldiers found it even more indispensable after it reached the front. Within weeks, the tape spread across the battlefield, not as regulation supply, but as a rumor. Infantrymen patched ripped tents and mended helmets with it. Mechanics used it on fuel lines, gun stocks, and shattered vehicle windows. A bit of tape stopped radiator leaks or held together frayed wiring. Sailors sealed leaks in boats, and aircraft crews patched bullet holes mid-mission. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. The material was strong, elastic, and sticky enough to bond to almost anything. Soldiers joked that, if it moves, tape it down. If it doesn't move, tape it up. The tape's matte green rubber coating blended with the olive drab of uniforms and vehicles. In photos from the front, you can occasionally spot the faint strip of its surface glinting under sunlight, a small piece of home front ingenuity holding the machinery of war together. Stout never patented her idea. Johnson & Johnson engineers formalized the manufacturing method, but the War Department listed it generically as waterproof sealing tape. She did, however, receive a commendation letter from the government thanking her for an idea of exceptional value to the war effort. It wasn't fame, but for a working mother during wartime, that acknowledgement meant everything. As the fighting dragged on, soldiers found new miracles to perform with the sticky fabric. Parachutists wrapped their weapons and boots in it to keep out mud on D-Day. Jeep drivers used it to hold spare parts together until proper repairs could be made. In the Pacific Island campaigns, engineers strapped bamboo poles with tape to build improvised bridges. One legend tells of a field medic who used it as emergency bandaging to hold compresses during a supply shortage. None of it appeared in military manuals, but everyone knew somebody who swore by it. By the war's end, more than 640,000 Jeeps were produced, and each new crate arriving at depots bore the signature green tape seals. When the guns finally fell silent, factories that had produced miles of the adhesive faced a problem. The military had stopped ordering, but the machinery kept running. Johnson & Johnson reimagined the material for civilian life. They changed the color from olive green to silver to match heating ducts in the booming home construction market. It was rebranded Duct Tape. Within a few years, every handyman in post-war America had a role within reach. That small change of name quietly shifted its purpose. From sealing ammo boxes to sealing air vents, from battlefields to basements, duct tape became an emblem of pragmatic problem-solving, the same mindset that built the Allied arsenal. The sticky roll sitting in a kitchen drawer owes its form not to consumer research, but to a mother's urgency to keep her sons alive. Yet beneath that story of ingenuity lies a familiar wartime irony. Recognition rarely followed invention. The government never licensed the tape under Stout's name, and Johnson & Johnson reaped the profits as peacetime demand exploded. The pattern wasn't unusual. Women filled industrial roles during the war but saw their credit and paying jobs vanish after victory. Duct tape stood as both symbol of their contribution and reminder of how quickly the world reverted to old habits once cannons went quiet. In its own quiet way, though, the tape had defied categories. It blurred boundaries between domestic and military work, between industrial precision and household improvisation. It captured something essential about the wartime mindset. When everything is uncertain, make do with what sticks. Soldiers carried that philosophy home, and it bled into post-war culture of tinkering and repair. Early television advertisements portrayed duct tape as the miracle fix for a modern home, strong enough for the army, safe enough for you. The irony that its inventing mother remained anonymous went unmentioned. The tape's continued presence feels almost metaphorical. Every shiny strip bridging a crack carries an echo of that first wet ammunition box in the Illinois factory. Its design hasn't changed much in 80 years. Even its layered texture, the rubbery sheen over woven threads, remains distinct, as if industrial evolution found perfection in simplicity. That permanence tells a deeper truth about how wartime constraints shaped material science. Necessity cut through bureaucracy in ways peacetime rarely allows. WWII forced collaboration between civilian engineers, chemists, and military logisticians at unprecedented speed. Duct tape was just one thread in a wider fabric of emergency invention. For every publicized miracle weapon, dozens of quiet, utilitarian solutions emerged, things designed not to win glory, but to prevent chaos. Rubberized adhesives, synthetic fabrics, corrosion-resistant paints, all contributed to the kind of invisible war technology that later defined consumer manufacturing. The War Production Board, which managed procurement, recorded thousands of minor design adjustments across industries. Most have vanished into archives, but many shaped post-war products. The same compounds tested for waterproofing tape found their way into early car gaskets and waterproof clothing. Material scientists who studied adhesion strengths under battlefield abuse went on to create new packaging techniques and surgical tapes. The chemistry of sticking would fuel a post-war boom in everything from aviation sealants to household rolls of Scotch tape. Yet even as duct tape became a brand of convenience, a philosophical shadow lingered. Its origin story reveals how moral lines blur when survival dictates innovation. Wartime necessity doesn't ask who profits later, it asks only what works now. The ethics of ownership fade amid urgency. Stout's uncredited idea highlights how many breakthroughs born in crisis are absorbed by corporations once peace returns. Historians call it the conversion effect, when wartime creativity becomes peacetime capital. But credit aside, the invention symbolized something powerful: empowerment through practicality. At a time when global destruction forced people to improvise, duct tape represented agency, the ability of ordinary hands to hold chaos together, even if only temporarily. That spirit resonated with generations raised in uncertainty. In contemporary culture, duct tape still carries that wartime DNA of adaptability. People build boats, wallets, even clothing from it, but the logic never changed. In emergencies, you make solutions visible, tangible, and fast. Every strip torn away is a reenactment of its earliest moment, solving a problem under pressure. Think of the irony. The same material soldiers used to protect bullets now holds together the fragile leftovers of the everyday: broken hoses, cracked shoes, splintered furniture. It's the unofficial emblem of ingenuity under constraint. Few inventions bridge military and civilian life so seamlessly or so quietly. When you step back, it's astonishing how a letter written by a mother in wartime Illinois traveled through presidential desks, scientific labs, battlefields, and finally home hardware stores across the world. No think tank, no research grant, just observation, care, and persistence. Vesta Stout's tape began as a plea: make this safer for my sons. The result bound entire systems of logistics together. In a broader sense, duct tape encapsulates the dual nature of wartime progress: human creativity solving problems born of violence. The ethical question lingers: should inventions born for survival be celebrated for the comfort they later provide? The tape's endurance suggests we can't separate the two. Each strip contains both compassion and conflict, necessity and invention, fear and brilliance intertwined. The soldiers who first carried rolls in their packs couldn't have imagined that the same sticky line would later hold airplanes, homes, and hobbies together. Nor could Stout have foreseen that her unpatented design would outlive the very equipment it protected. The green became silver, the battlefield gave way to suburban garages, and yet the principle, making do with what's at hand, remained intact. By the time post-war America leaned into consumer optimism, duct tape had quietly entered folklore as the universal fix. It patched more than machines, it bridged eras. It stood for a mindset handed down from those who faced scarcity and found creation within it. And as we move from that sticky strand of rubber and cloth to the next wartime innovation, remember that not all inventions explode onto history with noise. Some whisper through everyday use, binding the past to the present. Our next story begins with another invisible marvel of the war: a humming mechanism that once guarded convoys from unseen enemies and now reheats leftovers on a quiet afternoon. Blood banks, the logistics of life. In war, wounds outnumber miracles. On the front lines of World War II, medics learned that skill meant little without supplies that could stop bleeding. The challenge wasn't surgical precision, it was logistics. How do you rush blood to a soldier dying on an island halfway across the Pacific before that blood spoils? Before the war, transfusions relied on immediate donors. Blood lasted only a few days before coagulating or decomposing. Refrigeration was scarce, transport slower. For armies spanning oceans, fresh was impossible. Yet within a few short years, new systems would move human blood around the globe as easily as bullets, an achievement of science, organization, and desperation. At the center of this transformation stood a quiet revolutionist, Charles Drew, a physician and researcher whose meticulous experiments made large-scale plasma banking possible. Before combat blood could flow, he proved how to make it last. Drew showed that if blood cells and plasma, the liquid portion, were separated and plasma preserved by refrigeration or drying, the life-saving properties could survive transit. His work formed the basis of the Blood for Britain program of 194, sending American collected plasma across the Atlantic for victims of the Blitz. When the Luftwaffe bombed London nightly and British hospitals ran dry, Drew's plan kept ambulances stocked. The shipments were labeled simply Plasma US, but to thousands of wounded civilians, they meant life. Technically, plasma was ideal for war. Unlike whole blood, it didn't require strict type matching or constant cold. Scientists discovered they could dry it into powder, then reconstitute it in the field with sterile water. This innovation produced the iconic tin and kits, two nested containers issued to medics worldwide. Inside one lay the powdered plasma sealed against moisture, in the other distilled water. Mixed together, they produced instant transfusions with no refrigeration needed. Soldiers joked that it came, rations packed, like coffee for the veins. That simplicity masked a scientific leap. Freeze-drying had grown from a niche technique into industrial magic under the gun of wartime need. The assembly lines for plasma weren't factories of machines, but of people. Across Britain and the US, volunteers rolled up sleeves by the millions. Civic halls became makeshift donor centers. Posters showed smiling nurses beside slogans like, "Your blood can cross the ocean before you do." In laboratories, technicians in white coats spun glass centrifuges endlessly. Large pharmaceutical companies converted parts of their plants to fractionate, bottle, and box the golden fluid. Each pint donated on Main Street could, within days, be stabilizing a soldier in North Africa or a sailor rescued from the Atlantic. Behind those posters, scientists raced to perfect every link in the chain. Edwin Cohn, a Harvard biochemist, developed a process called cold ethanol fractionation. By chilling plasma and adding alcohol in precise steps, he separated useful components like albumin, a protein crucial for maintaining blood pressure in shock victims. His process birthed the first truly standardized medical product manufactured at scale. Industrial labs in the US turned out canisters by the hundreds of thousands, practically turning blood into an export commodity. Meanwhile, the military innovated in collection. Borrowing from pre-war Red Cross drives, Drew designed mobile donation units, nicknamed bloodmobiles, that could visit workplaces, schools, and community centers. Each was equipped with sterile instruments, refrigeration, and record-keeping systems, the template for every modern blood drive. Strict testing for syphilis and careful abo-typing became mandatory, setting global safety standards still followed today. What began as emergency improvisation evolved into medical routine. Yet progress didn't come without controversy. In the US, military policy initially segregated blood supplies by race despite scientific evidence that plasma carried no racial characteristics. Drew himself, an African American, publicly criticized the order as wasteful and unscientific. For all the rhetoric of unity on posters, prejudice still governed policy behind closed doors. Eventually, the pressure of casualties forced change. Necessity overrode bias, if only temporarily. Drew would resign in protest before that correction came, but his protocols endured. Out at the front, the results were revolutionary. In North Africa, field hospitals slashed mortality rates for hemorrhagic shock. Medics could now resuscitate soldiers minutes after arrival instead of watching them fade. In 1943, the Allies prepared for the D-Day invasion by stockpiling 3 million doses of plasma, a quiet logistics triumph hidden beneath the thunder of artillery. The same cargo planes that hauled ammunition also carried metal chests packed with the yellow powder of life. After landings, supplies followed trucks of rations so that every field surgeon had fluid within reach. A soldier shot in the leg near Saint might have lost half his blood before reaching a tent. There, a medic snapped open a tin, poured sterile water, swirled, inserted a tube, and minutes later, color returned to the man's face. Each act of revival rippled backward through an invisible supply chain stretching across 2 continents and countless donors. The system turned compassion into mechanism, empathy into infrastructure. In the Pacific, the distance problem magnified. Tropical heat spoiled plasma quickly. Sea transport took weeks. Allied logisticians experimented with daring airlifts and creative cooling methods. Some containers traveled submerged in ice baths. Others rode inside bomb bays for quick deployment after landings. Whole blood eventually joined plasma at forward bases once refrigeration trucks became available, confirming that a combination of innovation and audacity could conquer geography itself. These medical supply operations mirrored the complexity of weapons logistics, proving that survival demanded as much organization as combat. Each quart of plasma represented planning equal to any air raid. Long before supply chain management became corporate language, it was battlefield necessity. The term logistics of life was coined by quartermasters who handled the crates alongside ammunition and food. They knew morale required not just bullets and bread, but hope in bottle. The moral landscape around this breakthrough deepens as we trace its aftermath. After 1945, those same industrial processes pivoted effortlessly into peacetime medicine. Hospitals adopted mass donation programs patterned on the military model. The Red Cross institutionalized DRUS systems, establishing national blood banks across the US, Britain, and beyond. The Cold War turned biological resource management into civic ritual. Giving blood became meditation on citizenship, a way to serve without fighting. But even as science marched forward, the ethical shadows lingered. Wartime expedients often meant corners cut, records rushed, volunteers uncredited. Pharmaceutical firms that had processed government-funded plasma later patented derivatives for private sale. Components like albumin, once produced for soldiers free of charge, became profit streams in post-war hospitals. Once again, urgency blurred ownership. The moral equation echoed our earlier stories. Collective innovation transforming quietly into commercial property. Technologically, the blood programs of WWII birthed an entire biomedical industry. Methods devised for plasma fractionation evolved into modern biopharmaceutical manufacturing. The same principles used to produce vaccines and therapeutic proteins. Refrigeration advances ensured that sensitive materials could travel farther, ushering in global medicine. Every cooler wheeled through a contemporary hospital corridor is, in essence, a descendant of the Army's 1944 field chest. Still, the human dimension carries the most resonance. Letters from medics describe awe and fatigue in equal measure. We hang bags from tent poles, men live. We run out, men die. For the first time, survival hinged less on surgery and more on supply chain. The front no longer stopped at the battlefield. It extended through laboratories, donor centers, transport planes, and factory lines thousands of miles long. That realization permanently altered how medicine viewed logistics as lifeline, not afterthought. There's also the paradox of anonymity. Blood erased individuality even as it saved individuals. Donors never knew recipients, and soldiers seldom learned the names behind the transfusions. Government propaganda framed this anonymity as heroism. The best medal is unseen. But it also reflected a shift in ethics. Wartime necessity demanded depersonalization. The human body itself became a material resource, standardized like any other supply. It's a sobering reminder of how efficiency can obscure empathy. Yet amid institutional abstraction, tiny human gestures persisted. Villagers waited in queues for the chance to give a pint. Nurses labeled vials by hand through sleepless nights. Pilots risked tropical storms to keep plasma cold. Each step remained a moral act of trust, proof that compassion can scale without losing its pulse. By 1944, reports estimated that 70% of battlefield casualties required blood or plasma and received on average 3 pints each. Mortality from shock and hemorrhage dropped dramatically. Some theaters saw survival rates double. These statistics echo quietly in modern emergency rooms. The The systems created under the pressure of war built the foundation for universal blood donation, trauma protocols, and organ transport operations. When disaster strikes today and agencies coordinate rapid relief, they're following maps drawn by that wartime network. Innovation born from chaos rarely confines itself to medicine. The logistical models devised for plasma influence civilian sectors as well. Concepts of centralized inventory, rotation, and quality control found their way into food distribution and vaccines. The Blood for Britain roots inspired global health supply chains in later decades. The victory of humanitarian logistics may be World War II most understated inheritance. Still, the moral reckoning remains incomplete. Charles Drew died tragically in 195 after a car crash in North Carolina. A segregated hospital, according to legend, refused him timely transfusion, a cruel irony regardless of disputed details. What's certain is that his contributions reshaped medicine, though systemic injustice denied him recognition equal to his impact. The contrast captures an enduring truth. Progress does not erase inequity, it reveals it. Looking back, the whole blood bank story reads like one long equation balancing human decency against human cruelty. The very war that created mass suffering also institutionalized compassion in measurable form: pints, units, shipments. Each vial symbolized faith that life could circulate faster than death. And when those systems became civilian infrastructure, they turned that wartime faith into daily normalcy. Hospitals stocked, ambulances equipped, accidents survivable. Every bag hung in a modern operating room carries invisible lineage from that era: the waxed tins, the volunteers, the exhaustive checklists. The practice we now take for granted owes its existence to global calamity. It is perhaps the most literal example of turning bloodshed into benevolence. As with duct tape, the magnetron, and the Jeep, the ethics circle back to necessity's paradox. War demanded solutions too urgent for profit or politics. Peace converted them into institutions and revenue streams. Yet if moral purity vanished in the process, practical good endured. The creation of blood banks proved that even under fire, humanity can coordinate selflessness with factory precision. The next time you see a crimson bag swaying gently by a hospital bed, remember that its calm rhythm was once born from chaos. The syncopated heartbeat of convoys, factories, and lab workers determined to outpace death. The line between destruction and preservation has rarely been thinner. From engines that roared to plasma that pulsed, the pattern becomes clear. In wartime, innovation bleeds between science and survival. And as we shift from the flow of human blood to the smallest visible bloom of life, a mold viewed once as contamination, our story turns microscopic, chasing humanity's most unlikely savior: a fungus that conquered infection and remade medicine forever. Penicillin, the mold that won the war. In 194, a small group of scientists stared into a petri dish that could change the course of the war. Inside, a patch of yellow-green mold was quietly killing colonies of bacteria. The substance it produced had been known for years, but almost no one believed it could be harnessed on a scale large enough to matter. Alexander Fleming had discovered penicillin back in 1928, only to set it aside as an intriguing curiosity: unstable, unpredictable, and impossible to manufacture in quantity. Yet when the world plunged back into conflict, that forgotten mold suddenly became one of the Allies' most urgent classified projects. The war created a terrifying arithmetic. More soldiers were dying from infected wounds than from bullets. Even small scratches could turn lethal in the mud and chaos of battlefields. Sulfur drugs, the best medicine available before penicillin, helped somewhat, but resistant bacteria mocked them. The Allied command realized that if penicillin's promise held true, it could save tens of thousands of lives. The challenge was that laboratories could make mere milligrams, nowhere near enough for armies. Turning mold into miracle required more than scientists. It would need the weight of governments, corporations, and an entire wartime industrial system. In Oxford, biochemists Howard Florey, Ernst Chain, and their small team at the Dunn School of Pathology began the first serious push toward mass production. They refined Fleming's discovery into usable form, isolating the active compound and proving in mouse trials that it could cure infections even when given late in illness. Encouraged, they famously tested it on a London policeman who was dying of sepsis. The recovery astonished observers until the limited supply ran out and the infection roared back, killing him. The experiment proved both penicillin's power and the tragedy of scarcity. It worked, there just wasn't enough of it. That scarcity defined the next 3 years. British labs were under bombardment, short of resources, and unable to scale cultivation beyond trays of nutrient broth. So in 1941, Florian biochemist Norman Heatley boarded a military transport plane to the United States. They carried no samples in jars, just sealed envelopes containing the dried spores of the mold, hidden in their coat lining. Their mission resembled espionage. Persuade American industries to turn a British scientific curiosity into a wartime manufacturing triumph. They began in Peoria, Illinois, where the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Northern Regional Research Laboratory specialized in fermentation processes. There, an improbable alliance formed between academic scientists, industrial chemical engineers, and factory managers from companies like Pfizer, Merck, and Eli Lilly. They had little in common except urgency. Within months, they were building experimental vats, sterilizing corn steep liquor, the nutrient-rich byproduct of corn milling, to feed the finicky mold. Earlier batches of penicillin had produced barely a few units per milliliter. The corn solution multiplied yields beyond expectation. The trick lay not only in the chemistry, but in the airflow, deep tank fermentation. Growing organisms in oxygenated liquid under pressure turned out to be the missing key. It was a revolution in manufacturing biology, though no one called it that at the time. The same facilities that once brewed beer and industrial solvents now grew Penicillium chrysogenum by the ton. Engineers in white coats monitored temperatures and foam levels instead of artillery output charts. Each tank went through meticulous cycles: sterilization, inoculation, aeration, separation, extraction. Every gram counted. "We are growing a weapon," one scientist remarked. By early 1943, production jumped from laboratory drips to thousands of liters. Penicillin, once priceless, was suddenly measurable by the bucket. At first, the U.S. military treated the program like a weapons project. The War Production Board declared penicillin a high-priority strategic material. Laboratory notebooks carried restricted stamps, and shipments moved under armed guard. In 1942, all the penicillin in America, every vial, could have treated a single serious case of infection. By the next year, factories were turning out millions of doses monthly. Pfizer's Brooklyn plant switched entirely to fermentation runs, its neighborhood air thick with the sour-sweet scent of nutrient broth. Workers joked that you could smell salvation from the street. The timing proved critical. In June 1944, as the Allies prepared for D-Day, stockpiles reached full scale. 3 million doses of penicillin awaited in depots and field hospitals. Each small glass vial was vacuum-sealed, labeled, and packed beside morphine and bandages. Medics called them liquid gold. During the Normandy landings, soldiers carried the antibiotic in their kits like ammunition for life. When wounds festered in the damp trenches, the difference between pus and healing was often one injection. Mortality from infected wounds plummeted by double digits. Historians estimate millions of Allied personnel survived because of that in-time production leap. Yet penicillin's story isn't pure triumph. Ethical ripples run through it like veins under a microscope. Because of wartime secrecy, few of the original researchers could publish openly or claim patents. When peace returned, corporations moved fast to secure rights. Fleming, Florey, and Chain received the Nobel Prize in 1945, acknowledging discovery and medical significance. But the industrial engineers, the ones who actually cracked mass production, remained in obscurity. The miracle of antibiotics transformed quickly into a profit race. And what had been government-funded collaboration became proprietary competition. Even the celebrated discovery narratives blurred. Popular writers began depicting Fleming as a lone genius who single-handedly saved humanity, erasing the multinational network that industrialized his petri dish. British newspapers hailed penicillin as proof of national ingenuity. American advertisers later used it to promote corporate innovation. The line between philanthropy and branding vanished almost overnight. It was the same pattern seen with the Jeep or duct tape. Collective urgency recast as individual heroism, the messy human crowd of invention turned into a single face. But behind polished stories lay the gruesome reality of how the drug proved itself. On battlefields across Europe, doctors used penicillin experimentally, adjusting doses on the fly, learning through necessity. The antibiotic's spectacular effectiveness brought new dilemmas. Who should receive limited supply? Policies prioritized wounded combatants over civilians, prioritizing military objectives over humanitarian fairness. Civilians in ruined European towns were turned away because every vial was earmarked for military use. The logic was brutal, but consistent with wartime arithmetic. Lives were triaged by strategic value. There were failures, too. Early batches varied wildly in purity, sometimes causing allergic reactions before quality controls tightened. Industrial vats occasionally became contaminated, ruining entire runs. To guard against sabotage or espionage, government censored production details. Newspapers could celebrate wonder drugs without revealing where they were made. That secrecy saved other lives. The Axis powers, lacking equivalent resources, never replicated the process at comparable scale. Germany tinkered with synthetic sulfur combinations, while the Allies flooded the front lines with genuine antibiotics. From a technological perspective, the Penicillin program redefined modern pharmaceuticals. Deep tank fermentation, perfected under war pressure, became the foundation of the antibiotic and biotechnology industries. The experience taught engineers to manage living organisms as scaled machines, linking microbiology to industry like never before. Later generations would use the same principles to produce insulin, vaccines, enzymes, and vitamins. The idea that microbes could be industrial partners, farm animals in steel stables, started with those wartime vats in Peoria and Brooklyn. Scientifically, the search for better molds continued even amid production chaos. At one point, a laboratory assistant in Peoria reportedly found a particularly productive strain growing on a cantaloupe from a local market. Genetic variants of that strain multiplied penicillin yields fivefold. From a single piece of spoiled fruit emerged strains that supplied armies. It was biology's version of an unexpected reinforcement story. Salvation hidden in everyday decay. Economically, penicillin marked the birth of Big Pharma as we know it. Companies that had once focused on dyes or aspirin transformed into biomedical giants. Pfizer's gamble on deep tank fermentation permanently altered its trajectory, setting a precedent for private corporations partnering with government science during crises. The relationship was symbiotic yet uneasy. Public funding carried moral expectations, but peacetime profits soon overshadowed them. The same factories that filled military depots with free penicillin later pivoted to sell antibiotics globally for revenue. Humanity's healing turned into a commodity, one more echo of wartime necessity sliding into capitalist routine. Ethically, the penicillin saga also exposes a quieter inequity. Distribution beyond the West lagged for years. Colonized nations, whose soldiers had fought under Allied flags, often saw little of the antibiotic during or after the war. Infections in Asia and Africa continued to claim lives even as pharmaceutical exports boomed elsewhere. Scientific heroes celebrated in Europe rarely addressed this imbalance. The mold had won the war, but peace was far from evenly shared. Despite its flaws, penicillin's legacy reshaped society's relationship with illness. The idea that bacterial infection could be routinely cured changed expectations of medicine forever. What had once been death sentences became inconveniences. That shift, mental as much as medical, paved the way for population booms and global health revolutions. Yet embedded within that optimism is the war's shadow. The conditions that birthed the antibiotic were uniquely grim. Without the urgency of millions of wounded bodies demanding salvation, research might have languished for decades more. The scientists themselves understood this irony. Fleming often warned against overconfidence, predicting that misuse could breed resistant bacteria, a prophecy modern medicine still battles. He also admitted that if not for war, penicillin might have remained a minor laboratory curiosity. Crisis gave it wings. Peacetime stability might have kept it crawling in petri dishes. Florey felt conflicted, writing privately that their success sprang from tragedy. A reminder that innovation and anguish often travel in the same convoy. The story of penicillin ultimately mirrors that of humanity under pressure. Resourcefulness sprouting from ruin, cooperation born of fear. In 1943's factories, women and men in lab coats worked 20-hour shifts, scraping residue from fermenters, extracting amber crystals with solvent, filling glass ampules until fingers blistered. They weren't soldiers, yet they fought an invisible war whose victories were counted in recoveries, not territory. As one supervisor later said, "Every time a batch cleared the filters, I felt we'd captured another town." When victory came, those same technicians saw their creation repackaged for the home front. Pharmacies advertised the miracle of penicillin without mentioning trenches or factories. Peacetime patients accepted pills that carried no trace of secrecy or risk. The antibiotic era had begun, ushered in by circumstances too horrific to repeat, yet too transformative to forget. Penicillin's path from accidental discovery to wartime savior to everyday medicine stands as one of history's strangest turnarounds. It encapsulates the central paradox of World War II technological legacy, the world's capacity for destruction unlocking unprecedented compassion through science. That delicate mold, thriving where everything else perished, symbolized endurance at microscopic scale. Out of decomposition came defense, from rot, renewal. The fungus that flourished in war has since circled the globe in tablet bottles, quietly preserving the daily peace its wartime pioneers could only imagine. And as we step back from that magnified world of vats, flasks, and spores, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Each invention born of crisis, duct tape, radar, jeeps, blood plasma, penicillin, carried more than utility, it carried moral weight. Each asked the same haunting question: can goodness arise from necessity drenched in violence? The answer may lie less in invention itself than in remembrance. Every roll of tape, every hum of a microwave, every vial of antibiotics still whispers its origin in war. The mold that won the conflict didn't just save lives, it preserved a truth: that even in humanity's darkest experiments, life finds a way to grow toward the light. Ripples of innovation, the war's invisible legacy. When the guns went silent in 1945, something strange lingered in the factories, labs, and workshops that had fed the war. It wasn't just leftover ammunition or surplus machines, it was momentum. 6 years of relentless problem-solving had rewired how nations thought about invention. Entire industries had learned to compress timeframes, erase bureaucracies, and turn wild ideas into workable prototypes in weeks. As soldiers drifted home, this machinery of innovation didn't stop. It simply changed its purpose. Across continents, war's byproducts began seeping quietly into civilian life. Steel once destined for bombers was shaped into kitchen appliances. Synthetic rubber found its way into shoes and car tires. Radar research spun into radio communication, and penicillin's fermentation tanks inspired food processing. A civilization that had raced to destroy was now racing to modernize. Wartime urgency proved addictive. When you've seen what coordinated ingenuity can do, peacetime patience feels obsolete. Factories that had churned out jeeps began designing tractors and delivery trucks. The people who assembled aircraft panels turned their hands to refrigerators and washing machines. The magnetron, once mounted on military aircraft, migrated to restaurant kitchens. Duct tape held together workshops during Reconstruction, while the logistics networks built for blood and medicine reappeared as global supply systems, shipping everything from powdered milk to vaccine. In less than a decade, the scars of conflict were paved over by convenience. Yet beneath that surge of prosperity lay an uncomfortable DNA, every efficiency borrowed from mobilization, every breakthrough born of threat. Innovation had learned to obey command structures and deadlines dictated not by curiosity but by fear. The war had taught scientists to think like soldiers, target the problem, achieve results, ignore cost. That mindset built miracles, but it also blurred ethics. If urgency justifies everything, what happens when the sense of emergency never truly ends? Governments quickly realized the power of continued research funding. In the United States, agencies that had coordinated wartime science rebranded as permanent institutions. Laboratories that once built radar arrays pivoted to nuclear research. Biomedical programs evolved into public health systems. What began as the War Production Board's Science Division became the blueprint for federal research agencies guiding modern R&D. Other nations followed suit. Wartime collaboration had proven that centralized coordination could deliver miracles. Peacetime leaders turned that insight into policy. The results were dazzling. Within a generation, technologies rooted in the 194s rippled outward to transform daily life. Antibiotics normalized longevity, consumer vehicles conquered rough terrain, microwaves redefined domestic labor, and adhesives and polymers shaped a disposable culture. Each convenience carried a ghost of its origin, a trace of emergency encoded in its design philosophy. Durability, efficiency, standardization. all hallmarks of wartime manufacture adopted by civilians who never questioned their military ancestry. But progress didn't come free. The corporate empires that rose from wartime contracts learned an enduring lesson about control. Patents once ignored for expedience now became battlefields. Companies like Raytheon, Pfizer, and Willys overland parlayed government-funded breakthroughs into private monopolies. What had been collective achievements soon acquired price tags. The ethics were fuzzy. Should profits flow to shareholders or back to taxpayers who had bankrolled the research? Wartime cooperation evaporated into peacetime competition, and the idea of open science yielded to secrecy once again, this time commercial rather than military. Even culturally, the war's efficiency ethos infiltrated everyday thinking. Advertising borrowed martial language, new, powerful, tested under pressure. The home became a miniature command post equipped with tools and appliances engineered to outlast scarcity. Housewives flipped switches with the same confidence soldiers once had in field gear. Suburban tranquility ran on wartime reliability disguised as convenient. When something broke, you didn't despair. You improvised, taped, or tinkered, a domestic echo of the battlefield mentality. Yet this legacy had a darker register, too. The pressure that had driven discovery also normalized disposability. In war, replacing broken parts was faster than repairing them. By the 195s, consumer culture adopted that logic wholesale. Planned obsolescence mimicked the supply cycles of military hardware. A culture of maintenance gave way to a culture of replacement. The ingenuity that once stretched scarce resources now fueled endless consumption. From necessity, we learned abundance and forgot why scarcity had once sharpened our minds. The human cost of progress rarely made headlines. Workers who had labored under blackout conditions found themselves laid off when contracts ended. Women who had filled laboratories and assembly lines were pushed back to domestic roles even as their inventions transformed domestic space. The paradox deepened. They debuilt the future only to be confined within it. The same societies that hailed Vesta Stout's Duct Tape or Charles Drew's blood systems quietly erased their names from peacetime narrative. Innovation survived, but recognition did not. On a global scale, the redistribution of technology redrew boundaries of power. Nations that mastered wartime science emerged as superpowers. Those that didn't became clients or colonies of the new technological empires. Radar research led to computing, computing to atomic energy, and atomic energy to geopolitical dominance. The seeds of the Cold War sprouted directly from the soil of hot war innovation. Each advance promised security, but ensured dependence on constant advancement. A perpetual mobilization of intellect now waged in laboratories instead of trenches. Still, to reduce this inheritance to cynicism would miss its human brilliance. The same wartime systems that birthed profit motives also generated unprecedented empathy through technology. Blood banking proved that global logistics could serve compassion. Penicillin showed that curing could be scaled like weaponry. The Jeep demonstrated that design could democratize mobility. Each was a retort to despair, proof that coordination could redeem chaos. Even when misappropriated, these innovations carried a kernel of hope, the ability to repurpose fear into function. As the 20th century unfolded, echoes of World War II engineering habits shaped every new crisis response, from vaccine pipelines to disaster relief. Whenever humanity faced scarcity or threat, the blueprint repeated. Unified disciplines, compressed time, prioritized practicality. It's the same genetic code the war imprinted on civilization's problem-solving instinct. Whether launching rockets or coordinating global health, we still chase solutions with wartime intensity, measuring success in speed and scale rather than reflection. So what remains invisible are the moral ripples, the quiet compromises embedded in our conveniences. Every sealed container, every quick-release latch or instant mix medicine embodies lessons first learned under sirens. They testify that creativity flourishes most when failure has consequences, and that progress often inherits both the brilliance and blindness of urgency. Perhaps the real legacy of the war isn't the gadgets or corporations it left behind, but a mindset. The belief that any problem, given enough pressure, can be engineered away. It's an intoxicating creed, born in crisis and sustained by comfort. The challenge now is remembering its cost, the exhaustion, the exploitation, the ethical shortcuts buried beneath each miracle. Yet even acknowledging that cost doesn't diminish the wonder. The ingenuity that once shielded soldiers now cushions entire societies. Ordinary objects, tape, radar tubes, jeeps, plasma kits, pills, form a quiet memorial to human adaptability. They remind us that survival and invention are inseparable instincts, and that even from the machinery of destruction, creativity can emerge humming, rolling, and breathing new life into peace. As we trace these ripples outward, we see not just inventions but intentions, people confronting the impossible and crafting permanence from peril. And that realization leads us to a final reflection. If necessity forged so much progress through conflict, what might we achieve if we learned to innovate not from fear but from foresight? The hidden lesson of wartime invention. When the smoke cleared and the factories dimmed their lights, one truth flickered quietly through the chaos. Pressure can breed brilliance, but brilliance rarely asks permission. Every object born from that war, each strip of duct tape, every Jeep axle, each bubble of penicillin, carried an invisible fingerprint of crisis. They were proof that invention is less about genius and more about urgency. Yet beneath their practical success lay uneasy questions about credit, cost, and consequence. World War II didn't just accelerate technology, it redefined what it meant to collaborate. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, and ordinary workers became one vast experimental machine. The boundaries between science and service blurred until discovery felt like duty. In those circumstances, mistakes became mandatory steps, and ethics often waited their turn. Even miracles like penicillin came wrapped in bureaucracy and inequity. But still, they worked. And the people behind them, often anonymous, changed the direction of civilization without realizing it. Consider Vesta Stoudt, whose letter about wet ammunition boxes sparked the creation of duct tape. She never patented anything, never toured factories, never sat for interviews. Her reward was knowing that soldiers might reach home because of a better seal. Charles Drew standardized blood processing, only to face racial segregation from the very system his work had strengthened. Howard Florey labored in secrecy so profound that his triumph was almost forgotten. They, and thousands like them, lived in the strange middle ground between altruism and exploitation, doing good out of necessity, not recognition. That's the hidden lesson humming beneath every wartime invention. Progress depends on ordinary people crossing their breaking point and refusing to stop. Crisis compresses time, forcing improvisation faster than bureaucracy can block it. When governments turned to industry asking for the impossible, they found mechanics, lab assistants, and homemakers willing to share intuition as currency. Wartime invention was communal improvisation written at industrial scale, a jazz of necessity. Innovation experts often celebrate these stories as proof that adversity drives creativity. That's partly true, but the war added a darker note. Innovation driven by fear tends to forget who pays its cost. Each breakthrough arrived on the back of exhaustion, scarcity, or grief. Behind Mickey Mouse posters recruiting blood donors were overworked technicians fainting beside centrifuges. Behind gleaming radar dishes stood scientists who slept beneath desks as raids shook their labs. Behind triumphant Jeep parades were displaced workers whose contracts evaporated the day peace was declared. Progress demanded a toll too steep to count, and yet people kept creating. They built forward because retreat felt unthinkable. The ingenuity of that era reveals how compassion can propel invention as effectively as fear. Vesta's tape was love physicalized, a mother's affection turned into material resilience. Drew's plasma networks expressed equality in liquid form, defying prejudice through physiology. Even the magnetron's transformation, from weapon to kitchen tool, suggests redemption through reuse. The war cracked open humanity's worst instincts and its best ones at once, and invention became the bridge between them. There's also a subtler pattern linking them all, collaboration born from contradiction. Britain shared its magnetron with America out of desperation, trusting strangers with survival. Rival pharmaceutical companies shared lab notes to chase a single microbe. Competing car makers co-designed the Jeep even as corporate lawyers argued over patents. For a moment, pride bowed to pragmatism. The reminder lingers that when purpose overrides ego, science moves faster than profit. The tragedy is how quickly that unity dissolved once peace made sharing optional again. Today, those wartime methods still steer how we solve problems. When disease outbreaks or disasters strike, the world reenacts wartime rhythms, task forces, crash programs, prototype races. We praise efficiency but forget the human intensity that refined it under duress. the very institutions that manage modern research, federal agencies, corporate labs, international consortia, owe their organizational DNA to 194-era cooperation. Even our everyday impatience for rapid solutions echoes the tempo of a world at war. Perhaps that's the lasting paradox. The war taught us to expect miracles on deadline. It proved that enormous systems could pivot overnight, that imagination could scale, that innovation could outpace catastrophe. But it also showed how easily moral reflection gets postponed when survival dominates the agenda. Every generation since has borrowed that sense of instant problem-solving, often without inheriting its humility. To learn from those inventors is to acknowledge both sides of what they built. They weren't saints of progress, but survivors using intellect as armor. The spark that created duct tape, magnetrons, jeeps, blood banks, and penicillin wasn't ambition, it was fear metabolized into function. And maybe that's the central insight. Fear doesn't always paralyze, sometimes it organizes. The question is whether we can summon that same intensity without the destruction that once justified it. Each of these wartime creations began as an answer to pain and ended as a promise of convenience. They remind us that technology is emotion made tangible, anxiety turned into adhesive, loneliness transformed into mobility, dread distilled into medicine. Innovation's raw ingredient isn't genius, but empathy under pressure. Humanity, cornered, looks for exits. Sometimes it builds doors. So when we look around, at kitchen counters, hospital corridors, highways, we're standing among artifacts of that collective quick thinking. The tape in a drawer, the hum of a microwave, the wheels of a jeep, the drip of a blood bag, the pill on a bedside table, they're all quiet memorials to a world that refused surrender. They whisper that necessity revealed what cooperation could do and warn what it costs to forget. The hidden lesson of wartime invention is that suffering guarantees progress. It's that progress carries memory. Where there's urgency, let there also be conscience. Where there's invention, let there be gratitude. Because the tools that comfort us today were first built to keep someone alive tomorrow. And behind every convenience lies a hand that once trembled, solving a problem too heavy to ignore. What we hold without knowing. Everyday life hums with ghosts of the Second World War. The roll of duct tape in a drawer, the microwave warming coffee, the jeep idling at a stoplight, the faint rhythmic drip of blood in a hospital, the bland white tablet curing infection, each is a relic disguised as routine. We hold these things without sensing the urgency that shaped them, the exhaustion that refined them, or the fear that paid their cost. What we call convenience once answered a cry for survival. That's the quiet irony of progress. The further we drift from crisis, the more we forget that calm itself was engineered. The magnetron lost its menace, penicillin lost its secrecy, the jeep lost its grime, and the tape that once sealed death away now mends dinner chairs. We inherited comfort built from chaos, yet we treat it like background noise, useful, neutral, endlessly available. In forgetting the pressures that birthed it, we lose the thread between danger and design. But history remains embedded in texture. Run your thumb over duct tape's woven ridges, and you're touching the warp and weft of Vesta Stout's determination. Listen to a microwave's hum, and you can almost hear radar echoes bouncing over dark seas. A jeep's suspension still carries the engineer's promise that nothing, not mud nor fear, should stall momentum. Even blood bags and antibiotic vials glint with the same utilitarian glass once shipped in convoy boxes across Atlantic storm. Modern material culture is a collage of wartime memory, quietly proving that invention outlives intention. The ethical shadows stay, though. Credit lost, profit gained, compassion industrialized, progress seldom travels clean. Each object poses the same unspoken question. If creation can arise from desperation, can we cultivate it without repeating the despair? Humanity mastered crisis engineering. Now it must learn peacetime imagination. The challenge lies in building with foresight rather than fear. Still, there's beauty in the inheritance. These 5 stories show that cooperation, once forced by danger, can thrive by choice. They reveal that ordinary people, factory workers, medics, scientists, mothers, can reimagine survival into generosity. The weapons of ingenuity no longer need battlefields. They already shape every quiet gesture of repair, rescue, and restoration. The next time you tear a strip of tape, start an engine, press a microwave button, donate blood, or swallow a pill, pause an instant. You're handling artifacts of endurance, tiny testaments to how the human mind transforms chaos into continuity. These 5 wartime stories might look like separate miracles, but together they remind us that innovation is rarely neutral. every convenience carries the echo of crisis. Innovation needn't forget its origin, only reinterpret it. Perhaps remembrance itself is the final utility we owe to war, the awareness that progress has a memory. Because peace doesn't erase the past, it builds upon it. The comforts that fill our days carry the fingerprints of people who once built under fire so others could live in calm. The next time something works so easily you don't think twice, remember, someone once made it so the world wouldn't fall apart that day. Look closer, listen for the hum beneath the ordinary, and discover the hidden histories pulsing through everyday life.